All right, this is the chemical bonds notes, and this is part of Module 2, and so we're going to take some Cornell notes on what chemical bonds are and the different types of chemical bonds. So chemical bonds are bonds that hold atoms together. And we have different kinds of chemical bonds. There are 3 types of chemical bonds. We have ionic bonds, we have covalent bonds, and we have hydrogen bonds. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at each of these. We'll do ionic briefly, but it's covalent and hydrogen that we're really going to need to look at. So ionic bonds, these are attractive forces between oppositely charged atoms. So sometimes what happens is if you have an unstable atom, you're going to have one atom sharing an electron with another atom. Right? So we're going to take a look at an atom and then take a look at another atom. And we're looking at the fact that these 2 atoms have 2 electrons. That's what these dots mean. We can make little e's with negative signs because we know that electrons are negative. And then there's an outer shell. And in the outer shell, or the outer orbit, which is what these lines are, wants 8 electrons. Okay? And if there's only 1 electron, and here we're going to see we have here we have 1 electron in the outer shell. Okay, we have 2 on the inner for both of them, and that's full. And we can make a little note of that too. The inner shell wants 2 electrons. So we get the inner shell wants 2 electrons, the outer shell wants 8. If we can't fill up the outer shell with 8, we need to take it down so that just the inner shell is full. So what's going to happen here, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 electrons, and we want 8. So this electron here is going to jump ship over to this particular atom, and it is going to make 8. But this has 3 protons in it, and this one has 9 protons. So what we have now is we have 3 protons, which are positive, 3 protons, and now because this one left, we only have 2 electrons. So we have an overall charge of 1 plus. So this becomes a positive atom. Over here, we had 9 protons to start with, and we had 9 electrons, but we gained this one, so now we have 10 electrons, and so what we have here is 1 negative, so this becomes negative. And the negative and the positive, or the positive, I'm sorry, the positive over here and the negative over here attract one another, so these two atoms will stay very close together. That's an ionic bond. Okay, I'm going to move to the next page. Again, put the date. This is chemical bonds continued. And we're going to start up here with the covalent bonds. And these are ones you're going to have to really remember. This is a strong bond. And this is when atoms share electrons. Whoops. They share electrons. Okay, so they don't donate them. So what we see is something like this, where we might have a carbon, and the carbon has 4 electrons, and so it wants to have more than that. This is carbon. So what happens is it shares with oxygen, and it shares with oxygen over here. And so this is sharing. These atoms right here are sharing these electrons. Okay, so but what we have is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons for the carbon. So that is not necessarily going to be the best thing for this particular molecule, because it doesn't have 8. So it can actually share more than that. And what we do is we draw it as a dot diagram. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 outers, and the dots equal electrons on this diagram. And then we also have oxygen that has 6, so it goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the same thing on the other side, oxygen with its 6 electrons. And what's happening here is that these 4 electrons are being shared, and these 4 electrons are being shared, and that gives us what we call a double bond. So that's very strong. So these are strong bonds because of all these electrons that are being shared. And we see covalent bonds holding water together, carbon dioxide. So this is water. This is carbon dioxide. And those are covalent bonds because they are very strong. It holds the O's and the H's get held together by a covalent bond, and the carbon and the oxygen gets held together by a covalent bond. So the important part that you need to know here is that covalent bonds are strong bonds, and that atoms share electrons. Okay? And you can write that down and highlight it, because those are important. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So the date again, and chemical bonds. Continued. And here we are going to do the last one, which is hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds are weak bonds, and they are bonds between polar molecules. Oops. Like water. Okay, what does that mean, polar? Polar molecules, like water, have a slightly negative and a slightly positive end. All right, and it would look like this. Water looks like this. You have oxygen, and you have 2 hydrogens, and this has a slightly negative charge, and this has slightly positive down here. And this bond right here is covalent. Remember, we said that before, it's strong. But what happens is another water molecule will come over here and it's got its slightly negative end, and what happens is we get this bond and this dotted line, and that is your hydrogen bond. So the hydrogen and the oxygen are bonded together. And actually we can make it up here, this dotted line, instead of this down here. Okay. All right. And so that holds water molecules together. These can be easily broken. So we will see these hydrogen bonds again. So let's go ahead and highlight hydrogen bonds, weak bonds, and then the definition. Okay? And we can even put and highlight this. They can easily be broken down here. All right, that is chemical bonds. Make sure that you go back to your other pages, look to see what do we need to highlight, probably our definition of chemical bonds, and that we have 3 types of bonds. There's ionic, covalent, and hydrogen. And we can highlight the definition of an ionic bond. Make sure you write some questions on the side and put a summary at the bottom of your last page.